moving right along to the final key role of the chair, promoting lawful and ethical operations of the board. School boards are public bodies entrusted by the community with overseeing schools in their district. And as elected officials, board members are expected to act with integrity and adhere to the highest ethical standards. And really, public confidence in our education system relies on that and on the competence and integrity of school board members. So here are some guidelines to help you think through lawful and ethical operations. First, board members need to be clear they have no legal authority outside the context of the board. So while some citizens and staff may assume that individuals can exercise power in various ways, the chair has a responsibility to ensure board members understand they don't have any power outside of their role on the board. They shouldn't expect that they can personally direct the work of staff or influence operational decisions or influence decisions on behalf of their children if they have children in the district. Board members should maintain confidentiality of executive session. As we discussed earlier, the topics that discussed in executive session are limited and often sensitive, disclosure of which can potentially infringe upon individuals' privacy rights, including personnel, employees, and students. In addition to those considerations, really board trust depends on the understanding that what's shared in executive session stays there. Steve's mentioned it several times. We think it's very important, so I'll say it again. Board members assure that schools are well run but are not involved in the operations of the schools. This is the big one. Board members must avoid actual perceived conflicts of interest. So board members really are elected to attend to the needs of students and taxpayers. They can't be driven by personal concerns or the perception of personal considerations. And so if a situation arises that could compromise that perception, the board member really should recuse himself or herself from any discussion or consideration of the member. And furthermore, if one board member perceives a potential conflict for another board member, the integrity of the process dictates that that board member sort of bring that conflict to the attention of the board member, and that it be dealt with under the board's conflict of interest policy, which is a required policy that every board have. And finally, recognizing the validity of board decisions even if you don't agree with them. So board members can certainly disagree with the outcome of a vote, but they should respect the function of the board that led to that decision. Particularly if as a chair you've led them to a so-called consensus decision, it should be something that people can live with, even if they don't agree with it. If they don't agree with it, they should be working within the board process in order to achieve a different result, rather than trying to go outside the board straight to the public or what have you to get the outcome that they want if they weren't able to achieve it on the board.
Okay, just a comment on that, because this one comes up a lot, and obviously we are all citizens and we all have the right to differing opinions, and there are board members who will disagree with the decisions of the board. What we urge people to do, and what we would hope board chairs would be able to do, is to emphasize the fact that school boards are the vehicle that's been set up to make these kinds of decisions, and the people who join school boards or who run or elected to school boards have bought that notion that they are valid entities that are making decisions, and it's important to recognize the validity of their decisions even if you disagree. So you don't have to go out and say, I thought that was the best decision that ever was, but it's important for people to honor the fact that the board took a vote, I lost, I didn't agree with the decision of the board, but it's the board's decision, and that's what we're going with.
Great. So one last thing on ethical operations. As a chair, one strategy you can use to set mutual expectations around ethical behavior on the board is to establish a code of ethics. the VSBA has an updated model code that may be a useful starting place for that conversation. In the code, we have 3 categories of behavior, I guess. One is to act within the scope of, the person agrees to act within the scope of their official role, to uphold the highest ethical standards, and to respect their peers, constituents, and confidentiality considerations. And there's a list of supporting commitments within each of these categories. And as I said, this is just a suggested starting place. Part of this tool is to just have the conversation as a board. You know, what do we expect of each other? What are we willing to hold each other accountable to? And really, we think that's an important conversation to have. Okay, so we had, I think, going to skip the conflict of interest case study in the interest of ending this on time.
There are 3 questions that I would like to squeeze in here before we wrap this up. The first was, board member, are there legal ramifications on board members who break executive session confidentiality? That was a specific question. And our understanding is that somebody's not going to be arrested for that. However, you could create liability, I'm assuming, if you were in an executive session and there were issues being discussed about a personnel matter, and somebody went outside and said, well, in executive session the other day, this is what was said about you. Once you've broken that protection that you have in your executive session, if the person didn't like what was being discussed, I would assume that there would be nothing preventing them from suing the board, and in fact, once the veil of the protections of executive session is violated, you open the whole board to liability. So I don't know, Nicole, whether you have more you want to say about that one.
Well, I would say the same is true with discussing student issues. That there are federal laws governing
right.
the disclosure of confidential student information. So yeah, while you will not be arrested, you will be exposing the district to liability.
Right, and people should take that very seriously. The second question was, I have heard varying views on whether a chair votes on all matters at the same time as all other members, or only to make or break a tie.
That really depends, I think, on whether you're governed by Robert's rules for small boards or not, and that's a decision that you really need to make at your organization meeting. It's not something that happens sort of on the fly. Typically, under regular Robert's rules, the chair only votes to break a tie, but that is not always true when a board is elected to operate under Robert's rules for small boards.
Okay. And someone said, where can I find the oath of office?
But I know the clerks have the oath of office. Sometimes it's administered at town meeting if you're elected at town meeting. Otherwise, you need to go to the clerk's office and be sworn in before your first board meeting.